Press the bell icon on the YouTube app to never miss a video from Newslaundry.
Welcome to Newslaundry Chhota Hafta. For the full episode, subscribe because it is behind the paywall and only subscribers get access to uncut, complete content. Newslaundry Hafta is our weekly wrap of all that made the news, all that didn't, and all that should have and all that shouldn't have. We agree, we disagree, we critique, and occasionally we beat each other up. But it's all good fun. Subscribe.
This is a Newslaundry podcast and you're listening to NL Hafta.
Hello and welcome to Newslaundry Hafta. अंग्रेज अपना लगान और Newslaundry अपना हफ्ता कभी नहीं भूलते हैं. I am going to be your host for this episode because Abhinandan is gallivanting again. He's in Morocco and he's there for a conference. He's doing some serious work. Madhu's also out of station, so it's going to be me and Raman sir from the in-house team.
Hi.
And to make up for our lack of in-house team, we have two very distinguished guests with us. Nitin Sethi. He's Senior Associate Editor with Business Standard. Of course, you've read his stories. If you care about news or if you're an avid news consumer, you've read his stories, you've read his byline. Before this, he was working as Deputy Editor at Scroll, and he was also Senior Assistant Editor at both The Hindu and Times of India. He writes on governance and political economy and has kept a deep focus on development, natural resources, energy and environment. Thank you so much, Nitin, for being with us on a day where you have a very interesting story that's come out that we're going to be talking about. And of course, we have Hridayesh Joshi with us. He's joining us for the second time very graciously.
Thank you very much.
He's a freelance journalist. He wrote some fantastic stories for Newslaundry during the elections. He used to be senior editor with NTV India. And he's also written a book, Rage of the River, the Untold Story of the Kedarnath Disaster and Lal Lakir. Recently, he was in Uttarakhand, which is my home state and his home state. And he was covering the forest fire there, which we should also be discussing. This episode is going to be behind the paywall. So if you're having issues subscribing, then write to us at contact@newslaundry.com. Our app is not working, so please subscribe through our website. And if you're facing issues with the website, then send us money via PayPal to prashant@newslaundry.com. I'm going to just touch briefly on some of the headlines of the week, and then we can begin talking with Nitin and Hridayesh. So the Hindi imposition debate took over. There was a lot of commotion on this through the week. The centre had released a draft education policy. It recommended that students in non-Hindi speaking states should learn regional language, Hindi and English. Of course, there was a lot of backlash. Raj Thackeray said, "Don't incite us." There was a lot of backlash from states in South India, and then the centre tweaked it on Monday, and now they don't specify languages for students to study. There was an incident of an IF plane that went missing, which was, in the beginning, there was some lack of clarity on it, no? Like whether it went missing or not, and there was some conflicting...
It was flying over Arunachal Pradesh, and then it disappeared. So this is the fourth day they are searching for it.
And the plane is supposed to be accident prone, the AN-32,
it is.
which is designed back in the 80s, and there's been no luck so far. They haven't been able to trace it. The world celebrated the World Environment Day yesterday, where UN warned of dangers of air pollution. Delhi, I think everyone's made peace. We're all like, take care. We'll just live with it. Terrible forest fires in Uttarakhand, which of course Hridayesh will talk about. In Delhi, the garbage mountain, which has become a landmark for Delhi. When you're entering Delhi, you recognize the fact that you're entering Delhi with that garbage mountain in Ghazipur. It's going to be taller than Taj Mahal by 2020, apparently. And there's a severe water crisis in Karnataka. Schools were shut. 5,000 villagers were hit in Maharashtra also. Another story that really made a lot of headlines was Kejriwal announcing free metro and bus rides for women. So that'll be something interesting we could discuss, whether it's a good idea, bad idea, the criticism against it. Business Standards report on unemployment has been proven right. The ministry finally, after the elections, released the data and confirmed that unemployment is at a 45-year high. So all those people who were saying this is fake news and how this data is wrong and who were going after the reporter and the publication now have to eat crow. Things in Congress are just the same. Lots of blame game. Ashok Gehlot said that Sachin Pilot should take responsibility for his son's defeat. And the big story was that the BSP and the SP alliance is also broken off. Mayawati said Akhilesh could not help us. He couldn't get any other votes. Akhilesh got angry and said, so be it. But then Mayawati just said in the end that, okay, it's not permanent. So we just may have the Gadbandhan back again. Giriraj Singh of the BJP mocked Bihar politicians, including BJP leaders, for attending iftar party. I think Amit Shah apparently rebuked him. Though I don't know where the rebuke happened. Where was it? Does anyone know? Did he...
happens, I clearly remember during the UPA time also, whenever there was something which suits Congress, particularly the reporters who covering the Congress beat used to come out that Sonia Gandhi ne aisa kaha hai, Sonia Gandhi bahut naraz hai. But Sonia Gandhi never used to come out on record. So I mean, this is kind of a very...
So this is just Amit Shah ko bura lag raha hai.
All the
reporters are saying.
People who are sympathizers of, a particular party, they come out and
he hasn't publicly issued a statement or done anything.
This happens.
Okay. Based on sources. We have a very interesting letter on sources actually. So it'll be fun to get your views on that. Let's start off with your story today, Nitin, that's come out.
Sure.
Where you've basically said that the Patanjali group with Ramdev's aide, Acharya Balakrishnan, companies associated to him have picked up more than 400 acres of forested common land in Aravallis of Faridabad. So tell us a little bit about it and tell us the implications of it.
So we've all been hearing stories of how Aravalli's been turning into a real estate zone. Began with Gurgaon at some point. Faridabad became the new hotspot. We've all heard how real estate moves and how lands are purchased. I think what we found fascinating was here was a company which at least pretends and claims that it works largely in the FMCG sector and others, has grown rapidly at rates that few other companies have. And we came to know that actually it's quietly gone over and purchased a substantial amount of a village. And it's done... The land is purchased is quite fine for a business to otherwise do its job discreetly and not tell people. But what we found was the land that is purchased is actually forested land, which the Supreme Court and various other entities have been saying protect. It is hilly terrain, which traditionally Supreme Court orders and others have said should be protected as such. No commercial activity, including agriculture, is allowed there. There was also a restriction on whether these lands can be bought at all or not. So in 2012, the state government said these lands cannot be sold, particularly in this village, because they had mapped out and seen a lot of money was coming in and illegally purchasing land. So from our records, the records which are with us, it comes out that the company, through small front subsidiaries and a bunch of real estate dealers in Faridabad, went about registering power of attorney agreements in different parts of the country to bypass these restrictions on land purchase, and picked up lands between 2014 and 15.
So this is almost a village, you said?
It's a substantial part of a village. It's about 400 acres in a village, which I would say is about a third of the village.
And this is protected area?
This is legally by Supreme Court rulings of 2011. These are lands that can only be owned as commons by the panchayat. There are other Supreme Court rulings that say these kind of lands as Aravalli should be protected. There are other rules and regulations of the Forest Conservation Act, etc., which say these things, these areas should be marked separately as forest, even if they're not recorded as such, and be kept away from any privatization and commercialization.
Aravallis are one of the oldest fold mountains, I think, and they're a very ecologically very sensitive zone. What kind of activities are they doing there, this company?
So my colleague Kumar Sambhav and I went through the village looking at what they're doing. At the moment, what we could see traces of cultivation that they already begun, but cultivation of organic food, etc., is what they're claiming, at least on ground, though it doesn't exist on paper. Beyond those in the company papers, they don't reflect those businesses being done. What's concertingly problematic is that they've privatized these lands, they've cordoned them off. These lands should not, at least by law and regulation, be cordoned off. At the moment, you do not see too much physical activity on ground, which also perturbs the villagers, because a lot of them were wondering what would really happen. I mean, we know from records again that it's a village which is on the cusp of development between Gurgaon, Faridabad and Delhi. It's where a large, very broad highway passes by. There are roads being cut to that area. Once that does happen, it's the next extension of Faridabad in some sense. We've heard these stories of how Faridabad wants to extend commercial spaces. Real estate is always looking for new lands. This seems to be like a perfect land if you buy disputed property there and are able to convert or kill the dispute over time, the property prices escalate. So one could sell it off at huge profits, and we've seen records of this happen in other villages in that area, where disputed properties in the Aravallis were bought and then sold off at great profits. So you could earn super profits out of just managing the administrative ecosystem, so to say. Or you could just do real estate development, as has happened in Gurgaon earlier.
Hridayesh, you've been traveling in Uttarakhand, and this is something that I've also noticed. I've grown up in Uttarakhand. As a kid, I used to always go back home to Nainital, and steadily, increasingly, when you go back during April, earlier you could see the mountains, now you don't see anything, there's just haze and the menace of forest fire. So I want to know one thing first, that is it worse than what it used to be, and why? Like, because we've always had people burn grass, burn forest land for grass.
While doing the story, I spoke to some of the finest of people, experts who have worked in this area. They are saying the same thing which you said, and they say that the fire, people have lived with fire, and fire is it has been there for a long time. People have dealt with wild animal and everything, but they have not been able, or they have lived with fire. It has happened at different levels. One is that rampant construction has finished all those water sources in jungles. Earlier, very, very small water streams used to crisscross the forest landscapes, and even if the fire, people also set fire. People actually set fire in the hope that after monsoon they will get better grass for their. So now people have migrated. More than 1,000 people, according to official report, in Uttarakhand are ghost villages. More than 1,200. Nobody lives there. If you go in those villages, you will find the houses locked. So despite that, so much fire is happening because the conditions are so that any tree, people blame actually pine, but apart from pine also, pre-monsoon there is leaf fall. And the situation is perfect for, very conducive for forest fire to spread. But because of a lot of things, and if you Google, and you will find that in 2016 the state government had a disaster management plan for forest fire.
उस time भी बहुत हुआ था. I remember 2 साल पहले also there was a lot of,
but they had also put it on record. But if you go there, no one is bothered about it.
But are they natural fires or are they accidental fires?
No, they are actually not all of them are natural fire, but there is no natural fire actually, I would say. I mean, there is some reason, the fire starts. But the point is that there are situation is such that, I said, that there is no moisture, there is no water, and long dry seasons, climate change
is also affect.
That is also there, but the government is also so lazy and corrupt that they allow it to happen. They just don't bother about it.
If I could add to that, I mean, something that he must have also noticed, traditionally fires has always been part of mountain ecology, but they were controlled by drawing what's called fire lines through these forests. It's a very active job that forest departments and communities would do before the summer sets in, which helps cordon off fires or control them once they get lit off. That process has fallen through simply because our forest departments have become very decrepit. They do not do the basic essentials. Then the kind of animosity that exists between the communities and the forest department, the communities do not want to work with the forest department actively to do this because they believe the forest department's already taken over the land, anyway trouble us a lot, there's small bribes to be paid all the time, why should we work on some things that were taken away from us to safeguard? So there's a sense of, this is a long history of alienation of forests from people in these hills, and the forest management systems have crashed over the last 20 years, I think, and that leads to the fact that once exacerbated fires happen, particularly under harsh circumstances like he's talking about, the dwindling springs, etc., you need more active management rather than what you had in the 80s and 90s, and we've actually gone back to the 70s era in some sense.
But Nitin said is very important. I actually forgot to mention that the people are actually very hostile to the forest department, rightly so, because you have been thrown out of the forest. You are not allowed to use the forest produce and all this. So जब उन्हें लगता है कि जंगल जल रहे हैं, ठीक हो रहा है, हमें क्या है, हमारा उसमें क्या stake है. So it is very important that one of the finest ecologist, environmental expert, Professor Ajay Rawat, he told me that there are 350 forest guest house as the best of locations. The forest department actually, he said, he interacted, they also know this, but they are not doing it because they think what they should do is that they should train all those unemployed youth and can bring very good workforce which can which can help to improve the ecological tourism and also become a force to control the forest fire. पर उन्हें लगता है कि ये हमारी authority को challenge हो जाएगा कल को, ये सब जो चीज़ें हैं कि मतलब कोई हम अपने why should we allow something? So people who have been very closely working in this, they.
I mean, the irony of this, that if you remember, Uttarakhand is the place where Chipko movement happened.
Yeah.
In 2006, we had something called the Forest Rights Act, which was in some sense trying to restore these forest lands back to people. Uttarakhand has one of the worst records in implementing Forest Rights Act. And you would imagine a land which actually the state got created out of a movement for Jal Jangal Zameen.
Exactly.
You would imagine they would have been at the forefront of implementing it. And regardless of what government we've had there, all of them have ensured that people actually do not get re-established rights.
Okay, so we've had a bunch of letters last week. Some of our subscribers were complaining about lack of enough reporting on climate change and environment in Indian media. So I want to know from you guys, and maybe we can start with Nitin, as someone who's been covering environment policy. How do you first rate Indian newsrooms' attention to issues of environment and climate change? And in your experience, like, what have been the hindrances? Do you feel like a newsroom is usually they just ignore these issues and it's sort of sexier to talk about politics or, like the BJP, Congress, whatever, and these issues are sidelined? Yeah, so 2 questions.
So let me take 2 minutes and put this with a little nuance. It's good to look at how a society or a bunch of journalists in a particular time in a country report on certain issues. If I was to compare India today with, say, at the same level of development any country in the global north, we'll find actually we're doing a spectacular job
of reporting climate.
With very limited resources. Individuals who are very motivated across newsrooms. And I'm speaking of newsrooms not only in English Delhi-based media, but vernacular press does a fantastic job. Just that they don't use the keywords that we like to mention as climate change. But the reportage on drought, issues of water, resources, fights over land, you'll find almost every day all vernacular papers are filled with it, just that they don't have the keywords that we search for when we talk climate change. It is a different language. Our vernacular, regional languages have different representation of the same resource conflicts. That said, I think also from the point, say 2007 till date, our coverage has expanded humongously. I remember it was almost funny to be called an environment journalist at that time. People would look upon you and saying, "Acha, tiger pe likhoge?" And that was we used to actually call it tiger porn at times, because you would only be looking at whether tigers are being born or not. Okay. And we've come a long way. I think there's a great sophistication that exists in the writers who write on climate change today and environment in general. There is a point where the news reporter stops. And that's when we go away from the generics of saying Jangal Bachao to saying who's cutting it. And I think there all newsrooms face a challenge, because at the forefront of this conflict is clearly an increased development agenda versus how do you conserve in a country that wants to grow at 5 to 6%, etc., etc. And the moment it reaches a point where you want to name and say these are the entities, these are the individuals who are doing what they're doing, then you suddenly find great challenges. And we've heard stories from across newsrooms, not only in Delhi, but regional papers, where that's almost impossible. It's rare times that we're able to write with complete freedom. I've been very fortunate, or at least because I moved around, I've been fortunate enough to be able to do it. Hridayesh has done a fantastic job. I would say people who in the vernacular do this, they're far more braver. They risk a lot of danger to themselves as individuals within the organizations that they exist and do this. We don't capture it as much sitting in Delhi. Can we do more? Yes, humongously more.
It's interesting what you're saying, because actually when you also look at data of journalists who've lost their lives in fatal attacks, it's mostly journalists who've taken on mining mafias in local. So most of the
resource conflicts.
Yeah, most of the journalists who've actually been killed. I mean, RTI, of course, RTI activists are there, but also most of these journalists are people covering mining mafia.
RTI, most of them were doing their RTIs on resource conflicts. This is a true pattern across the country. A lot of the conflict reporting that we hear, where we find journalists caught in the crosshair, we'll find they were also reporting on how resources were being somehow usurped by one or the other side in the middle of a conflict. So I think we're doing a spectacular job. Yes, but we must remember that overall our newsrooms are not capable of doing the deep work that is required on any field. In fact, I'd be counterintuitive to say because of a huge civic society pressure on these issues as the middle class grows, we've done much better on environment than we've done on several other issues like public health. I think it's far behind compared to the amount of highlight that environmental issues get.
True.
I wish it was more. I'm not trying
That's
to say
true. Public
I
health
should
is
not
quite-
get more space. But I think, to be fair, we are doing a pretty good job.
Okay, metro. Free rides for women in the metro and bus. Good idea or a bad idea?
I think it's a good idea.
Is it political? Like, very stupidly people are like, is this
It
political?
is.
Of course it's political.
It is political. I mean, I would say it is political, but I think it's a good idea, not so much in terms of security. Security is part of it. But as they are selling it, I won't buy it that way. It's definitely political. I think it is good for their movement. I mean, if they want to be employed, I mean, I think Express had come out with a very good edit on this, in which they pointed out that the women contribute just 16% of the total employment in Delhi. So
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I think it was 16%. So considering that, I mean, if they have this free movement through public transport, I think they will start, thinking about employment. And also, I mean, some basic things which I heard that the maid servants, who have been working somewhere for 3,000 rupees, but they are spending about 800 rupees on their travel. So they are going to save a lot of money. So I think it is good. It is, and it is not binding on those women who want to pay.
I think but I guess who will want to pay?
So that's up
Maybe
to you.
When people can shed subsidy and Prime Minister's appeal on LPG, they should also buy tickets.
But जैसे भीड़ हुई तो, I mean, why would you want to stand on line? You'd rather just...
Then you already have smart card. And
cards and all. That's true.
all.
It'll
Don't
be
have to
nice actually. Those who
stand in
can
line.
pay
You can
should.
charge it, anywhere.
And
you
I
wish.
think they should advertise it such also, I'm sure. What about you?
So I don't have a problem if anything is politically advantageous for a leader who takes a good decision. They should get political advantage out of it.
Yeah, of
The
course.
question is it a good thing? I think the metric to look at it is from three perspectives. What you're looking for is easy mobility for disadvantaged sections, whether it's women, whether it's the poor that travel long distances. There are different formats of discounting available across the world. Long distance is discounted compared to short distances. There are cities which are moving to make their public transport completely free. There is another side to this, and I think that's the one where Mr. Kejriwal is smartly avoiding, is if you want to give discounts and subsidies at one side, rightly so, you need to tax the rich. Now, who do you tax in Delhi's transport case? You obviously tax the people with the cars. Remembering that around 11% of Delhi's geography is literally covered by cars and car slots. That's all it is.
That includes
11%.
parking? Like
Parking.
okay.
When you park all your cars at night, 11% of Delhi's geography is covered by just cars. And we're not paying a penny for it. Right?
Wow.
Remember all the colonies with jam, parks and
no
fights
congestion
over
fee.
parking. So if Mr. Kejriwal was actually purposefully talking of management of transport and commuting in the city, then it would be a twin-prong attack. You would say, yes, free up public transport, provide subsidies to those who need it, work out a right mechanism. Maybe it's women to begin with. Maybe you can say long distance will be done rather than just for women. But you would also say, put a congestion fee that will compensate for the loss in revenue that you make here. Now, you would also talk about where does the ridership come from? We've not got any data either from the government right now or otherwise to say how much ridership of the poor and women happens in buses, how much happens in metro, how much is pedestrian, what other commuting formats you have. If you had this data in front of you, you could make a reasonable guess of whether this is going in the right direction or not. Right now, I think Mr. Kejriwal, maybe it's a good decision, but you cannot comment because there's no data out there to tell you what transport
who will
systems
benefit?
are. I mean, perhaps having feeder buses for the last kilometer would be far more advantageous for the poor because they end up taking rickshaws,
Or
autos.
for safety also. I
for
think have
safety.
the fee because you don't want to walk.
And there are
the last
lesser number of
that's
feeder
where it gets.
So I would have preferred that Mr. Kejriwal or whoever else is, and this is true of all previous governments for 20 years in Delhi. I remember congestion tax proposal came around 20 years ago in Delhi. Since then, every chief minister has been putting it aside, including central government. You would say, I have this transport plan. These are the easy things I can do right now. In 3 years, I'll escalate to this level. The fact is, we've all seen in last 15 years. You do everything to mishmash around with public sector as much as you can in public sector transport. You will not touch the private sector. If you remember the debate over BRT and everyone cried hue and cry, and therefore we've never had any reforms in terms of. So again, last data set, and I'll end with this, saying on a main arterial road, 70% of the road space is covered by cars, each car carrying 1 or 2 persons. The buses get about 20% of the road space. Now you would imagine a transport system that is moving 80% of your population would get additional road space. Cars should face a little problem. Therefore, you should escalate the amount of buses you have, public transport. But you need to have a plan in place and say, over 5 years, this is where we'll reach regardless of the opposition we face. I think this is a smart half a cookie job that Mr. Kejriwal has done in some sense.
Sun liya Afrika, mufat khoron. Not to brag or anything, but Newslaundry Hafta features in the top 50 in the world on SoundCloud in the news and politics category for podcasts. So do subscribe and see what you're missing, because when the public pays, the public is served. When advertisers pay, advertisers are served. Subscribe, help keep news independent and free. All Newslaundry podcasts are available on iTunes and Stitcher and any other podcast platform.